Hi everyone, my name is Nitya Narasimhan, and my talk today is going to be on progressive web apps and web components. So quick show of hands, how many of you here are web developers? Yes, my people, all right. So first I want to kind of give you a little bit of a background about me. I know I look incredibly young, but I've actually been in this industry for over 2 decades now. And I started off in research. I'm a PhD in computer engineering, and I worked at Motorola Research for over a decade on ubiquitous computing and advanced technology development for their set-top boxes and mobiles. But over the past few years, I've actually done mostly 2 things, development and advocacy. So I work with universities, small startups, local businesses, individuals, and communities to help them build mobile and full-stack apps. But more importantly, I also run the Google Developer Group in New York City and a sibling chapter in the Hudson Valley. And if you kind of look at what my purpose is, I think of it as how do I get people to look at emerging technologies, but actually go from being aware of what they are to doing something actionable with them, right? And that means either software development, which is great for the companies, or career development, which is great for the people. So that's kind of where I fit in. And today, I want to talk to you about what it takes to build a modern web app. So before we get started, let's look at some of the trends, right? We all know mobile is dead. Web is the way. No. The trend, if you look at this, right, and this is something we've all taken for granted, is that when you think back to like maybe even a decade ago, when you say web apps, it's like you bring up a browser on a PC and you go surfing, right? But now that's not the way it is anymore. Everything is on your mobile. So as a web developer, you have to think mobile first. So that's the first thing. But now you kind of look at it and go, wait, the perception is that when you're on a mobile device, the native app is going to dominate the web. In other words, there's a statistic that says that on a mobile device, users spend 87% of their time on native apps. And native apps means you install it from a market, and 13% on mobile web, meaning go through a browser. And now you're like, wait, what? I'm going to live and slave my entire life for 13% of the user's time that I'm going to fight for with everyone else who's building a web app, right? So you're like, why does it matter? Turns out that the reality is slightly different. This 87% is not necessarily the number you want to look at. The number is this. 78% of that user's time in the native apps is spent on just 3 apps. And we all know what those are going to be. Facebook, no, I'm sorry. Oh, it's dead, right? I'm sorry. We're not going to go there. But you know what I mean, right? We're all like mail and then like Instagramming away our food and maybe we call mom, but that's about it, right? The rest of our time, we don't even do much with apps. And the average user doesn't even install a new app every month. By contrast, we visit about 100 websites a month on average, right? So this is this interesting thing. People actually go discover things through the web, but they can't like change that. So the real thing we are asking is that discovery, where I'm visiting 100 websites, how can I transform that into an experience where I'm actually recursively going to the same thing? How can I make that look and feel native? And that is where we're coming to talk about progressive web apps. But before I go into that, I actually want to split this conversation into 2 parts. When we think about modern web apps, we want to think in 2 perspectives. First, we are all users, right? So you want to think about what does it mean to improve the user experience on a modern web app? What are the technologies? What are the things we have to do? And then the other side is, okay, as a developer, what are the things I have to do to make my life easier in actually making those web apps happen? So first, we'll start with user experience. And this is where progressive web apps come in. How many of you have heard this term, progressive web apps? Yay, all right, awesome. So if you take one thing away from the talk, it's like progressive web apps put your apps on fire. And that's the acronym, right? This at least comes from Google. The second part I ripped off shamelessly, but this one comes from them. And FIRE is really standing for fast, integrated, reliable, and engaging experiences. The most important thing you want to think about with progressive web apps is it's not about a specific technology or a tool. It's really about the experience. What does it mean to be a progressive web app is I need to have an experience that does this. So what does this mean? Let's break it down. First, fast, right? We all love to like just stand there at our phone and watch the little thing go round and round, right? This is our life now. In reality, that's not. Fast is really about performance. And if you want to go on and impress people about, hey, what does it mean by web performance, right? Like web apps performance, this is called the rail model from Google. And it's one of the easiest ways for you to understand how you evaluate your app for user experience. And it consists of 4 parts: response, animation, idle, and load. So what it means is that if you're building a web app today, you want to look to see whether it fits these guidelines. Response time. When I touch something on the app, it should respond under 50 milliseconds. So in other words, if I press the camera button, it should click. It shouldn't be like 30 seconds later, click, when I've kind of like, it's not going to take a picture and put it away, and now it's taking pictures of the inside of my purse. That's not a fast experience, right? You want under 50 milliseconds. Animation. When you think about all these glitzy animations, you want to render it to the screen in under 10 milliseconds. That's fast. It looks smooth. It looks like butter. Third is idle time, right? None of us want to be charging our app like batteries every other minute. But idle time means when I write my app, try to maximize the amount of time that the app is idle so that, when it comes time to the user wanting to do something with it, the app's all ready to go. It's like, yes, I'm ready. I'm not doing anything. I'm here for you. What can I do for you, right? So you want to be able to focus on idle. And finally, load time. Unlike native apps, when you think about web, you're going over to a server to fetch stuff and then render it, right? Load time means you want to be able to get him to the interactive. Like the minute he goes to that app, I should see a screen and be able to do something really fast in under 5 seconds. Because if you don't do it in under 5 seconds, a huge chunk, I think more than 3/4 of your users will leave. Because apparently 5 seconds is about the amount of time you give to anyone. Moms will note this. Okay. So let's talk about, that was the right fast. Next is the integrated. And here's where, when you think about web apps, how do I make a web app kind of look to the user and feel like a native experience? So I'm competing with that. And this integrated means, when we think about a web app, what we see is the last one, right? Like the one with the browser bar. That's what we think. I'm going to launch a browser, go put in a URL. I see the URL address bar. I immediately feel kind of disconnected. I'm like, this is not an app. This is a browser experience. So when we think about integrated, we're really like, how do we go from that to the third one where it feels natural? There is no address bar. It's a full screen, full bleed experience. And it looks just like native. If you looked at that third screen, you couldn't tell if it was a web or a native app. It looks like a native app, right? So that's the first thing, and that's one of the things you can do. And in progressive web apps, there are different technologies that if we get time, we'll talk about. But the second part is really the launching. What's the best thing about native apps? I can pull out my phone, go to my home screen, press it, and it's done, right? Whereas when I think about a web app, I have to launch a browser, type in a URL, and go there. Maybe I've bookmarked it, but I've got one more level of indirection, right? So the second part of progressive web apps in the integrated is adding to home screen. There is a standard called Web Manifest. If you add that to your app, it effectively allows the it allows a mobile device to understand that you can take that icon that's packaged with the web app and put it on the home screen. So now you can launch your web app directly from the home screen without going to a browser. It doesn't look to the user like you used a browser, although under the covers, it's still kind of launching the same experience, right? So that's important. And one of the critical things is that they're also looking at the intelligence part. Like in Google's Chrome, at least, you can have the ability to prompt the user, hey, do you want to add this to your home screen? After I've seen that I've gone to the same site 3 times. New York Public Library in our house would be on the home screen in 3 seconds flat. This is what happens when you have a 9-year-old. Okay. The third part is reliable. So we talked fast, we talked integrated, reliable. The number one distinction between a web and a native app is for the web, you have to be connected to the network because you got to fetch stuff, right? So that kind of puts you at a disadvantage. And what, when we talk about reliable, is what they call offline first. So not just mobile first, but offline first experiences. And that means that, hey, to the extent possible, can we not make it so that my web app will work even when I'm not connected, or if I'm connected on what they call Li-Fi, which is flaky Wi-Fi, which you can't really tell is connected or not. And the technology behind this is the one and only technology. If you ever hear about, if someone comes and says, tell me one thing about progressive web apps, say service workers, and throw the mic down and walk away, right? That's the one thing you need to know. Service workers are the workhorse of progressive web apps. And what they are is a background thread that sits there. Your main thread is actually painting the UI. It's like a background process, it's a web worker that sits in the background and does work for you. And it does 2 kinds of things. One, it takes care of caching. It can prefetch data and cache it on your local device in local storage so that even if you get disconnected, it knows how to go and like check the cache and bring the data out and show you so that you always see something. Second, retrieval patterns. It acts as a network proxy. So in a sense, like even afterwards, my PhD, by the way, was in interceptors. So I love the service worker because it means that everything you go to the network for, I can stick my curious nose in the middle and say, what is it that you brought back and let me change this, right? It's incredible fun. I don't recommend you do this in production. But what it means is that you have control over how you render things. But the most important thing is what service workers does to enable step number 4, which is engaging. What does it mean to engage? The number one thing, if you build an app, you go to anyone in you go to manager and say, I want to build this app. They'll be like, how do we get users on board and how do we increase engagement? Native apps do that because they can put a little notification alert that brings the user back into the app even when the app is not running. Web apps can't do that. You have to launch it from a web browser, right? With this, you can do that. There are 2 APIs, one called the push API, one called the notification API, that effectively allow you to bring notifications to your web app. And it's powered by the service worker. So what does that mean? It means that because the service worker is running in the background, your app didn't have to be running. It's listening. And if you have a push message, you can send it, the service worker will pick it up, and the service worker can then launch that. It can do the notification part. It can launch the alert and say, hey, something happened, would you now like to go to that app, right? So it's super important. So like I said, remember nothing else on this talk, because you are, after all, going to go get drinks after. Remember, service workers are your friend, okay? And with all of that said, these are great, but you're like developers, all of you. So you're like, how do I actually build this? What do I do? How do I get started? I'd recommend you go to Web Fundamentals, a site on Google's developers site. And there's a ton of tools and libraries. I'm just going to highlight 4 really quickly, and then we'll move on to the second part of our talk. The 4 I want to highlight first is Workbox. Workbox is a lightweight library that basically brings web service worker support no matter what your front-end framework. So you kind of like can integrate it, out-of-the-box support for a lot of the things that you need in progressive web apps. And it's maintained by a team in Google, New York. Yes. So homebrewed, all right. Second thing is top right, you see a little lighthouse. That's Project Lighthouse. Project Lighthouse started as Project Lighthouse. Now it actually is integrated. It's integrated into Chrome DevTools in your browser. Or if you've ever been one of those people who ran a web page test, where you went to the site and put in your URL just to see how long it took to get things done, they've integrated into that site directly. And what it does is it gives you a report. It literally tells you, here I'm doing an audit on your site, and here's where you've done in accessibility, in performance, in progressive web apps. It rates you, but more importantly, it tells you how to fix it, right? So it's pretty easy to run, and you should definitely try it because it teaches you a lot about what that means to be performant. And the last 2 I won't go into too much other than to say that if you're a person who loves data, definitely check out the Chrome User Experience Report. It just came out. They released, like, literally, I think it's a BigQuery data set, but they released data from Google's own trove of real users trawling some of the most popular sites. So you can look at it to understand what are the performance metrics for real users, right? We are all curious inside, so I would recommend that. And Puppeteer allows you to do automated testing headless. But these are the tools if you want to look at progressive web apps. Yeah, you thought you were so done, right? We're only halfway there. I'm so sorry. But we're going to talk about the developer experience. So far, if you take one thing away, it's like, OK, if I want to make a web app competitive with native, I want to improve user experience. That's the Rail. That's like Fire. Great. But let's say you're starting a new project. So all of that is how I can take an existing web app and make it progressive for the modern ecosystem. What if I'm starting a new one? How can you make my life easier? This is not Google's acronym this time. I ripped it off because, of course, I want to say we need to put the developer experience on fire. So I totally made it up, but it maps. So think developer experience on fire as well. Flexible, interoperable, reusable, and efficient. Let's break it down. What does that mean? Flexible. Flexible means any new technology, and it's not even about web components, but in general, if someone comes and tries to sell you a new technology, your number one question is, do I need to use this whole thing? Or can I take the bits I need? Is it customizable enough for me to use what I need and repurpose it? That's number one. Number 2 is interoperable, because none of us start from scratch. We all go around clamped to legacy code, right? I know there are people here who still know COBOL, so let's not go there. But the idea is that if you're in a product group, chances are you're going to have to use existing code bases and add stuff to it. So whatever this technology is, will it work well with people who are already there before? Front-end frameworks, back-end databases, whatever it may be. Third is reusable. If you are a developer like me, especially if you're on a small team or an independent, you want pieces that you can reuse across all the projects you do, right? So can this technology lend itself to modular reuse? And last but not least, efficiency. This is sad but true, but your code, and I'm very sorry to break it to you, your code will outlast you, right? 50, 60 years from now, who knows where you'll be, but your code will still be there gumming up the works somewhere. And some poor soul has to look into it and say, what did this person do? And so the idea with efficiency is this easy for us to understand and maintain? And this is where web components comes in. So when we talk about this, now we're moving to the second part. Web components are kind of a standard that are the building blocks for new web apps. And this is a kind of like a line from their site, and it says they're a set of platform APIs to create custom, reusable, and encapsulated tags for use in web pages and web apps. But here's the kicker. They should work across all modern browsers, i.e., Edge, and be used with any JavaScript framework. We all know that there is no such thing as browser wars, right? Not really. So this is a big challenge, but it's a standard. And under the cover, remember I told you it's about 4 APIs, there are these 4. But you're in luck, because we're not going to go into all 4, we're only going to talk about one. Well, I'll tell you briefly what they are. How many of you know what an HTML tag is? Yay, okay. You know an HTML element, right? So imagine, how many of you just love divs, like everything, everything is divs and H1s and text, right? What if you could come up with a tag that was really representative of what you're trying to do, right? That's custom elements. And we're going to look into custom elements in a second, but the other APIs I'm just going to briefly talk about, and then we'll dive into custom elements. Custom elements lets you come up with your own custom tags. Shadow DOM says, oh great, you have a custom element? That thing's going to have complexity because you're trying to make this huge, complicated thing look simple. Shadow DOM will let you hide that complexity and give you the ability to encapsulate state. Because we all know we love global CSS. We love the way CSS mucks our whole life up, right? Not really. And so this allows you to basically encapsulate your style, right? And once you've got these custom elements built, obviously you need a way to bring them into your new app and use them. That's what HTML imports does for you. It's a mechanism by which you can bring in these custom tags to use in new apps that you write. And last but not least, we're all familiar with templates. But the thing about templates here, when we talk about HTML templates, is they're little snippets of code, but they're inert until they're used. So remember I was telling you this Shadow DOM basically allows you to come up with your own custom tag, and you write one line, and we'll see it in a second, but it hides the complexity of the div horrible stuff behind it. Well, every time I use this tag, if I'm pulling all the stuff in, even if I didn't do anything with it, that would be a problem. HTML templates allows you to declare these markups as inert markups that shouldn't be activated until I actually use the element. That allows you to fetch things without the overheads. But the core of web components is just that custom element. So that's all we're going to talk about. And why custom elements? So way back in the day, this was one of my favorite slides. Can any of you guess what that app is just by looking at the inspected? Oh, come on. It's so easy. There's a logo in the left top. Gmail. Thank you. Under the covers, that's the code for a Gmail page. It's like just a nested div after div after div. Remember that person who, this could have been you 50 years from now maintaining this code. Oh my God, which level of div was I in, right? So this is what that looks like, and this is what legacy code really is. The div soup challenge is when we build web apps, this is not efficient, this is not maintainable. Wouldn't it be great if we could go to something like this? And this is what early web components were: readable, reusable, extensible. So here, look at it. On the left side, you have a widget on the screen. The right side, that's what the tag looks like. It's literally paper tabs encapsulate. So paper tabs says, hey, this is an element that encapsulates a collection. Each one is a paper tab. Can you not read that and immediately see how that maps to that widget, right? God help us all. We all need more of this in our life because we need our tiny brain cells to pay attention to all the other things going on in our lives today. So let's make HTML simple, people. Okay, so this is what that looks like, right? This is custom elements. And underneath it, if you look at the var document query selector, it shows you how they get used. So the big vision behind web components is that you can create custom tags that hide the div soup, but to any other framework, whether you're a React person or a Backbone person, as long as it'll look and feel like any other tag. Whatever you could do with a div, you can do with this tag, and your app and your complete workflow won't know any different. So we're not going to go into too much detail because we're almost out of time, but I'll just tell you, this is all it takes to build a custom element. At the end of this, I have links to all the things that you can look at. But it's literally an ES6 class. You extend HTML element, and that effectively defines your HTML element. And inside, there's going to be a lot of stuff that we need to talk about. But I want to show you at the bottom, it says window.customelements.define. That's how you register this thing you defined with the browser. You literally tell the browser, hey, from now on, if anyone uses the tag Chicago-Bears, go Bears, this is the kind of element, this is the show and tell you got to do there, right? And the interesting thing is once you've used it, you can use the tag. Once you've declared and imported it into your system, you can use the tag just like you would anything else, whether it's an H1 or a div or whatever. It's going to be exactly the same. But wait, it gets better. The nice thing about these elements is because they're encapsulated, I don't even have to write them. I can just go and see if someone else has already written the element I want before I even try to write my own. And so there's an element for that was one of the mantras for the Polymer team. There's a site called webcomponents.org where you can go and find pre-built elements for pretty much everything. And you can start from there. Second question, but wait, are the browsers ready for this? Like last year I would have said no, but right now you can go to this site and look at the ecosystem readiness, and you'll see there's a sea of green, but there are some oranges, and we won't talk about the browsers that are in the orange, but they happen to be there. But they're getting on board. And you'll see that custom elements everyone is happy with, other stuff people are not. But the thing that you want to realize here is that for those that are not 100% on board, things like Polymer will provide shims that let you use them. Interoperability testing, there's a site called Custom Elements Everywhere where you can go and see how well web components will work with any other front-end framework, including React. And finally, hey, this is all great, but you said the browsers weren't going to support it. So how do I make sure that whatever code I write is going to work everywhere? Component libraries can help. They can provide you both syntactic sugar to make your life easy to write the code, but they can also provide the shim that hides the kind of like the discrepancies in browser from you until the browsers all catch up. There are many options, and I'm just going to briefly mention Polymer because Polymer comes from Google, and I do run a Google developer group, so yay. But I'm not going to say much more because we're almost out of time, other than to say if you want to find out. There was a talk in I/O that talked about where Polymer is. It's at 3.0. Definitely go check it out. The second talk that came from the Chrome Dev Summit last year, for those of you who are at that level of architectural usage, has a great talk on how you would structure complex apps with this. Last but not least, we all love boilerplate scaffolding. There is a starter kit that just came out that combines progressive web apps and Polymer in one that helps you scaffold out responsive web apps like that, that you should definitely try out. And with that, quick recap. We talked about this for like, what does a modern web app mean? We need a good user experience. We need a good developer experience. User experience is about progressive web apps. Developer experience is about, hey, web components. We need to be able to do more of these. All the resources I talked about are in here. And now we are done. Thank you. So this is a PDF, but the slides are actually available there. It's very quick and easy to remember. It's 2018-MDBW18-PWA camp. The reason I put that is every year we run a PWA camp. It's a one-day workshop. It's free. It'll be in GDG New York. So if you're interested in this stuff, keep an eye out and come join us. Thank you so much.
So correction, we're not actually done. Does anyone have any questions for our presenter?
Yeah. So close, I know, so close.
Are there any web apps, any mobile apps that you think should transfer to web apps, to progressive web apps?
So the interesting thing, all right, I'm going to split this into two because I want to keep you here forever. But I'll split this two because one is, are people doing it? Yeah, the Twitter app is a progressive web app. It used to be mobile. There is a progressive web app you can install. A lot of Google properties are now progressive web apps. You don't have to install the native app. So yeah, there are a lot of people doing this already. My gut feeling is a progressive web app, to me at least, is easiest to start with, and this I say to all my clients. When you're starting off and you're doing more reads than writes, like if you're actually consuming more content than creating, meaning you don't need that many native APIs, go progressive web app first. Because your reach is broader. You don't have to care which market you're in, right? You like get them to the app, they install it, whether it's iOS, Android, you're there. But the rubber meets the road when you start doing specializing stuff, right? Like if you want to do AR right now, it's getting there, but it's not quite there. So a progressive web app that does VR, AR, or that can do machine learning, they're all kind of floating in, but we're not quite there yet.